Hey, everybody, welcome back to Konversation. These are the next few that we're going to be having here. You're going to really enjoy this. We're going to be doing a lot of things
The next few?
Well,
Did you even introduce us?
oh, yes, that's right. This is Konversation with me, Rick.
And me, Nani.
I'm so excited about what we're getting ready to do.
Look how happy he is.
Remember, a couple of months back, we talked about they're doing an exhibition in Chinatown, which is all about Bruce Lee. We are Bruce
Lee.
Yeah, right? So they've asked us to go around town, all over the place, and we're going to be going all over the
Around
place
town.
to talk to people who actually know or have met and have dealings with him. And today, our guests, and this is crazy, we looked up on this because of our good friend,
Bob
Grandmaster
Gomez.
Bob Gomez. Thank you so much, Bob. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I know I'm going to mess it up. And I know the name the name Lee is not something I could really mess up. But knowing me, I'm
He
going to.
will.
And we're going to start with you.
I'm Donna Joe Lee now. Another Lee.
Another Lee. And this is.
I am Dennis Lee.
Now, they are no relation to Bruce, though, right?
No relation.
No.
Yes and no.
But it was
Yes and no.
really funny because my dad was the only Joe with the three Lees. There was Bruce Lee, James Lee, and George Lee. And it's what's funny now. I'm a Lee.
And your father is
Alan Joe.
Alan Joe.
Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe, because we heard his name back before he passed because of our good friend Bob.
Yeah,
He had-
Uncle Alan, they call him.
They called it Uncle Alan. So now I finally got, because I didn't know who that was, because we were kind of new to the scene, and we would hear his name and like, oh, that's too bad. I wonder who,
Well, we did see the picture of all four of them
Yeah.
looking like gangsters in their suits.
Yeah,
Oh, you mean on
yeah,
the
right, on the show.
yeah.
on the book?
Well,
No,
this
it
was over
actually
at
on
Bob's house.
and
Yeah.
on his wall he has
has a
that
picture.
picture.
Oh.
So he was pointing out, he's like, oh, this is Alan Joe, this is
yeah,
George,
this
this
is-
is... Yeah, so I was like,
yeah.
Now, George Lee,
My dad.
your father, where does he fall into this whole thing with Bruce? I mean, they're explain the Four Musketeers. I guess this is where we should start, huh?
yeah, that would be a good
Okay,
place.
I don't know. I didn't know that much as I was growing up in our Richmond house that he said he was going to take lessons with Bruce Lee. And he said he's a kung fu master, and he came over from San Francisco one night to the CACA function, which is Chinese American Citizens Alliance
Oh,
group, and Bruce did his famous cha-cha, his Hong Kong cha-cha for them.
How ironic that that's what he's famous for, on
he's
top
famous-
of the fighting stuff, right?
Yes, and so my dad looked at him when was a break in the show that Bruce was giving, and Bruce did a little bit of his kung fu, of the old kung fu at the time.
so it was during the break, it wasn't even in front of everybody.
Well, we heard, my dad heard that Bruce was into that, so naturally Bruce I gave a presentation, and then after everything was done with and everybody was ready to go home, my dad asked Bruce if he would open or something down here, since he knew that Bruce came down from Seattle. And from then on, I guess my dad was taking lessons with him and with Donna's dad and with James, and everything got together. And all I know is that he came home. My dad came home a lot of times, and he says, I'll show you a little bit what I learned. And that was the old classical stuff,
Right.
the holding the hands and contact and
sticky
stuff.
hands.
The
yeah.
Wing Chun.
Yeah, Wing Chun, the Wing
Right.
Chun, yeah. So that's all I knew, and I was going to the service a little later on in the time, and I was in the service while I watched Green Hornet, on the TV. In
I
the
know that man.
Day room, yeah. Well,
I could just see that.
actually, I didn't meet him.
Really?
Oh,
You took a
wow.
chance.
He took me out as a demonstrate, since I was one of the taller Asian at this high school we went to, and we knew he was going to be there. And he picked me out of the crowd, and he did his quick, right there.
That must have scared.
And I said, why me? I said, because I'm the tallest of the group.
Well, I was there, so maybe he knew that you were me. He
Maybe.
would've
I didn't know if he knew my dad, if I was my dad's son or not. So,
Right.
Oh.
Were you dressed up in a gi or anything like that?
no,
Or-
no. it's
Yes, you were
But
just somebody he
I-
yanked out of the audience.
But I
and-
was
Yeah, exactly.
with him, but he
we were
knew
all standing
me,
around
so
the
I
swimming
don't
pool.
know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
He
He was like,
knew
oh,
me.
I know her.
Yeah,
Come here, man.
he knew Bruce
Behave
knew who
yourself.
I
yeah,
was.
behave yourself, or
Yeah.
that's right. So, how did you meet Bruce?
Okay, we went. My dad heard about Bruce, okay, and his friend James Lee says, this is 1962, the World's Fair. And I was like 12 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And so he goes, we're going to the World's Fair. And then James says, well, when we're up there in Seattle, look up this guy named Bruce Lee. And so I remember we had this hotel. It's called the Monticello. I remember we stayed there, all my sister, me, and my dad, and Mom. And one night, Dad says, oh, I got to go over to Ruby Child's restaurant. And I says, Ruby Child's, why? He goes, oh, this guy named Bruce Lee lives up there at Ruby Child's. And I says, what? And he says, I got to meet him because James wants me to meet him. So anyway, we waited, and my dad, and I guess when Daddy came back, he was on the corner. We could look out I guess we're really close. I can't remember how close we were to the restaurant. And I looked out there, and Dad's talking to this really good-looking guy. And I'm looking out
Sorry.
there. I didn't know him
Yeah, how do
yet.
you live
You
to
didn't know
that?
at the time.
I didn't know him because I was like 12. And I looked at it and go, wow, who's that? And I guess Bruce was like, he's like 7 years old, so maybe he's 18, 19 or something like that. And I go, wow, Daddy's talking. So anyway, they leave, and Daddy comes home. And he goes, yeah. I talked to him. I had a drink at the bar waiting for him, and he came in, and he wanted to know, who are you? And it's like, Daddy's like, oh, well, James Lee sent me, and blah, blah, blah. And then they started talking. And I guess he had a few moves or something in blocking, and my dad was learning Kung Fu at that time with another friend that used to come over all the time. And so anyway, Dad comes with, I think he came back and he goes, no, I got a little bruise here. Blocking or something.
Right.
I go, what? What are you doing?
The guy's a bully.
So anyway,
But so handsome.
we went back
Handsome
to,
bully,
we
handsome.
lived in Berkeley at that time. And so Dad says, well, this guy's going to come down, and people want him to come down to Oakland to do demonstrations on his Kung Fu, because Dad talked to James, and somehow James and my dad and Bruce got him down to Oakland. And then he moved there when Linda was pregnant with Brandon.
Right.
Oh.
So anyway, I was kind of like, oh yeah. And so my little sister, she goes, oh yeah. She thought he was really cool too. So anyway, he wasn't famous then. Okay. And so he lived with James Lee and his family down there.
Right.
And Linda did too. And Brandon was born at East Oakland Hospital, where my sister was born, I was born, and my brother were born, all in the same hospital that all of us were born.
That's cool.
And so anyway, then my dad and his dad, George, were working out all the time
Right.
at this gym, and somehow they were talking about martial arts, and then my dad had all these weights, and he was like, he won the Mr. Northern California title as Mr. Northern California for bodybuilding in 1946. Okay.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, he
So
was
anyway,
looking
it's the
good, yeah.
first Asian to ever win something like that.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh yeah. So anyway, he was always into the bodybuilding, but he wanted to do martial arts. And so when he met Bruce got really excited about bodybuilding too. So Dad, had Bruce and the bodybuilding and all.
So they
the
had a
weight.
trade-off. You
Oh,
teach me
yeah.
this, I'll
And
show
so
you that.
My dad,
That's
Tit
awesome.
for
well, my dad had a grocery store in Oakland at this time, and Bruce was living with James and his family and Linda, and Bruce would come into my dad's store all the time. You could see him, and sometimes we lived in Berkeley, and my dad's store was in Oakland. So we go down and visit my dad, and we go visit my grandparents who were in.
Right.
So, and then we go down there, and there'd be Bruce there, and there's this weight bench. Okay, that weight bench that
I've heard a lot about that weight
was
bench.
inside my dad's storeroom, where my sister and I used to have a little TV in there and a little pico we could watch out. So anyway, we just used that bench to lay
Kinda
on all the
creepy.
time. And Dad
Dennis
had
is
weights.
like,
My
"This
dad
is-
had weights there, so I don't know if Bruce and my dad were working out in
Right.
the back
Nothing
there
changes.
sometime. But anyway, there's pictures of my dad and Bruce, and
That's awesome.
yeah, and so I guess, yeah, and then I guess Bruce used to cash his checks at my dad's place. And Dad says,
We won't charge you.
yeah, Dad says, oh, what? And he goes, oh, if I only had seen those checks now.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
Sell them on eBay.
Yeah, but anyway, Bruce would doodle. He had a lot of these drawings. He would talk to my dad and do something, and then he'd throw it in the garbage. Well, there were so many of them, but my dad never picked them up, and so they were all thrown away.
He
But
wasn't
Bruce was
famous.
diddling.
He was no. And
He's just some Chinese guy.
Yeah, well, he
You
was-
sound like the jilted lover, Dennis. Cut it out. Like, he's nobody.
It's okay, I'm on his side. I'm on his side. Literally.
Bruce never, my dad never thought. Well, Bruce was just doing this. He's
Yeah.
drawing things and.
You know, some of the drawings that he's done are really exceptional. I mean,
Well,
I've seen.
Dennis' dad kept those drawings, and that's what your book is. No
No,
letters.
no, they're letters, not
There were
Oh,
letters.
letters.
There were letters. Yeah. Okay, but weren't there some drawings in there too?
I don't know. I didn't really look at it.
He wasn't interested in Bruce the
So,
way
any-
you were.
Anyway, so
He was interested in Donna, not Bruce.
so
There you go.
anyway, so that's how
There you
I
go.
knew Bruce, and so Bruce used to come to, and then when we moved from, when my mom had my brother in 1964, we had to get a bigger house, and so we moved down to Fremont from Berkeley. So we were down there, and Dad still had his store up there, so it was kind of like he was commuting. So yeah, so that's how we knew Bruce.
That's
He's just a
cool.
staple in the family.
Yeah.
So
he'll
you,
come
you
in.
told me a really funny and cute story inside the house. Bruce Lee owes you something.
Oh yeah, okay.
Sorry, Bruce.
Okay, Bruce used to come over and okay. So when he became he had the Green Hornet. Okay, he would go. He was down there in
LA.
Hollywood, and
Yeah.
and they lived down in L.A. So that's where Shannon was down there when
Yeah.
she was little. And I remember them being down there, and he would come up to visit my dad and come to our house, and he goes, on your 21st birthday, I'll take you out for dinner. Of course, I was only like 20 then,
Right.
and I was in college, and I said, oh, yeah, sure, Bruce. Well, he had gone to Hong Kong after that, and I never saw him after that.
Oh.
And it's like, oh.
He
never
stood you
took-
up?
Yeah, he never took me to dinner. He says, yeah, I'm going to take you out for your 21st birthday. And I thought, gee.
Sorry to bust you out, Bruce.
But in the meantime, okay, I was in college and my sister was in high school, and she had this little fan club. She and her girlfriend and brother had this fan club, and Bruce loved A&W root beer. Okay, this was his thing. So she would get
Wow, a
Get
bodybuilder
together.
and soda. That's
yeah, A&W root beer was his thing, and so she would collect money, and when he come over, she would have the root beer for him. And it was just like 3 of them there or whatever it was.
That's cool.
So what? Did you have to call him? Like, hey, he's coming. He's coming.
No, because
ready.
Dad, we lived at home, and it's like Daddy says, oh yeah, Bruce is coming over tonight or whatever.
Get
so
the money
it-
ready.
So anyway, when I was in college, I was at San Jose State at this time, and it's like Dennis has an older brother, Doug, and he was at San Jose State at the same time I was in. He was getting his master's in chemistry, and I would see him on, and I was going to class. And
Was
I
he
go,
also tall?
I think, huh?
Yeah,
Doug? Yeah.
Doug
yeah,
is.
he walked like a camel, but he was also tall.
That's all. That's all.
That's okay.
No wonder he stood out.
It's that out.
Camel.
Proud. He walked very proud.
He's very.
Well, anyway, I would see Doug, and I said, "Oh, hi, Doug. What's going on?" And I says, "Oh, yeah, Bruce Lee is going to be over at our house. Well, Doug's never come to our house in Fremont, and he's never really paid attention to because I'm his brother's
Yeah, his little sister, yeah.
girlfriend.
Yeah,
It's like I'm like 7 years younger than him, and so But I would see him and I talked to him and all that, and then okay, so he goes, "Well, what time is he coming?" I says, "Oh, a certain date." And so anyway, when Bruce was there, he was dressing really spiffy that day. I remember, and I get the doorbell rings, and here is Doug at the door with his friends, and I go,
Of course, he brought everybody.
Doug, what are you doing here? Oh, we just happened to be driving by. I says, San Jose is almost 20 miles away. You just happen to be driving by here. You never ever came over before. Well, that was because he wanted his friends to meet Bruce. So anyway, they came over and,
Did they
bring
get to
soda?
Did they bring
No,
any? Did they bring any double soda?
No, because I don't know if everyone knew that he liked
I
Andy.
had
My
no
sister
idea.
knew, but it was like that. That was
So did
lovely.
they actually get to meet Bruce Lee?
Yeah, at our house in Fremont.
How much fun would that have been? You see a guy that who's Asian like you are, who isn't supposed to be anything special, but yet because of Green Hornet, you are now this big star, in an American show
Setting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and and you guys being old friends from even before he was famous, to now all of a sudden had this guy.
Oh yeah, but see, Bruce was just Bruce. I knew he was in Green Hornet, and I used to kind of, says check. I used to say that check, and it's like, I thought, oh yeah, but it's like he's just like, you've known him before he was famous,
Right.
And
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's
just like
how crazy is
part
that?
of- it's just like part of your family.
Right, one day he's just a family friend.
You just take it. I guess you take it for that's the way it is.
You take it for
and
granted, yeah.
You don't think that he is this big fan.
Yeah, that's what you were
And I
surprised
just
at Doug.
remember.
Oh, he didn't act like he was a movie star. He was.
Oh,
Very,
he was.
Well, he was always sort of aloof.
He's so
sort of-
smart. He was so smart. I just remember he had all this philosophy at his age. I was just thinking about all his writings and all the things he said, and I thought, God, he's so deep.
Right.
How can this young person think that way? He was very, very intellectual.
yeah. Oh well, he was always
thinking.
considered ahead of his time.
Oh,
I mean, everybody always
but
felt that
I
about
never
him.
really realized that until I'm looking back now, and I go, that guy was a genius. I
Well-
mean, he was just so with the things he said. It just means there's so much meaning to it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you look back but it's like after Bruce passed, my dad, was very close, and he kind of, took to make sure Linda. He always wanted to make sure Linda and Shannon and Brandon were doing fine. He would always call them. So that's what happened is that that he was like an uncle to them. So that's what Linda always called Uncle Alan. And she was just so sweet, and Dad loved all of them. So all through the years, it's
So
like,
they stayed in contact too, even after his passing.
oh yeah, because they decided to do the Bruce Lee Foundation, and my dad became one of the first board members, and I think his dad was in it too, wasn't he?
No, yeah.
And so when Linda wanted to honor Bruce's memory and stuff, they started that foundation. The Bruce Lee, it was something, Bruce Lee Foundation, I
Right.
think but it was an educational thing at first. And they were giving like scholarships, but now I'm not sure what
more of a
exactly because like Shannon's in charge of all that now.
Right.
But
And she's a fireball. She makes sure everything is.
oh, Shannon,
I love her.
Shannon's amazing. And
she
she can
just-
sing. I mean, she was so wonderful. When my dad passed, Linda gave my dad's eulogy, and Shannon sang my dad and mom's best favorite song.
And what was that?
I can't remember now.
Bad girl, bad daughter.
Oh, it's always you or something like that.
Okay.
It's always you or something like that. But yeah,
Looking back, right? Because that's all we can do now is look back at
Yes.
Bruce Lee's life, and and try to understand the man that was just incredible, way beyond his time, obviously, because he's considered the godfather of MMA. You know, he's the founder of his own system of Jeet Kune Do. But you guys didn't see too much of that, did you?
I didn't.
My dad was the one. Yeah, I mean, but they, they wouldn't work out at the house. They had some place in Oakland. I remember they would
Well,
go.
he opened up a
Yeah,
studio.
they were down there,
Yeah.
and then after that, when he moved to LA for, I guess they wanted him. They saw him in an exhibition, and all of a sudden he was down in LA and movies and stuff. And of course, they were doing the Kung Fu series with David
Right,
Carradine,
David Carradine.
and Bruce should have gotten that because of the prejudice and stuff.
Well,
it's like-
and that's why I'm asking about this stuff is because we all know Hollywood is fickle that way. You know, back then,
yeah.
at the time that it was, anybody of color wasn't going to be put up front.
Yeah, the main role.
And it didn't matter how good you were, how talented all that didn't matter. It was what at the
status
time Middle
quo.
America was going to tolerate, and they were not going to tolerate,
Tolerate
either blacks, Chinese, Filipinos, Mexicans of any kind
Yeah.
to be in the forefront of anything. And it wasn't until after their passing that you started to have Sanford and Son come out. Then you started to have all these other different shows,
But for the Asian community, it's still on the uprise because
Yeah.
we haven't quite reached that level.
and it's starting to get there.
exposure.
It's starting to
it's
get there
true.
now.
Very
Almost
true.
everywhere you
Right.
turn on the channel, there's going to be Asian representative in there now.
But that was the first step.
Yeah, I think to have an American play a Chinese guy, and then play it off by saying he was half Chinese and half whatever. I was like, okay, when I was young, I would love the show,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
didn't think anything of it because I actually thought he was Chinese.
Yeah.
He just squinted a lot.
Yeah, until you realize, well, no, and then you look at it and you say, wow, that was really prominent in back then America.
Yeah.
oh,
That,
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
and
It's
it's
accepted. Yeah.
it was a thing that was okay. Looking at it now, because I don't know if you guys, Bob told you or not, that our organization, the College Conversation, and the Bladed Mind, which is what we teach, we stepped up when all these Asian hate things were going on, and I asked all the people that have been on our guests who had schools if they would open their doors and teach the Asian community elderlies, give them free self-defense class, and they all stood up and said, "Yes, we'll do it." Because
Beautiful.
when I